A Georgia cold case from 2011 was finally solved, and the arrest shocked the entire community. On October 15, 2011, 17-year-old Blake Tyler Chappell danced under lights at East Coweta High School's homecoming. He smiled with friends, kissed girlfriend Rion goodbye, and walked alone through Newnan's quiet streets toward friend Austin's house. But Blake never arrived. 2 months later, his body was found in Shallow Creek on Summergrove Parkway, wearing only underwear, killed by single gunshot. For 14 years, his family searched for answers. Detectives chased dead ends. The case went cold. Then, in 2023, an anonymous letter changed everything. It led investigators to a name never connected to Blake's murder: Scotty Elliott Smith. When police confronted him, Smith's words betrayed him. He knew details only the killer could know. But what drove a man to murder a teenager he barely knew, then stay silent for over a decade? Before we get into the story, drop a comment with your country and the time right now. The gymnasium sparkled under silver streamers and twinkling lights. Blake Tyler Chappell adjusted his tie and grinned at his reflection in the bathroom mirror. At 17, he carried himself with quiet confidence, the kind that drew people to him without effort. His journal entries spoke of uncertainty about the future, but tonight, surrounded by classmates in their finest clothes, those worries felt distant. "You clean up nice, Chappell," Austin called out, appearing beside him at the mirror. His best friend since middle school, Austin had the easy laugh and athletic build that made him popular with everyone. Tonight, though, even Austin seemed nervous about asking Sarah to dance. Blake pulled the small corsage box from his jacket pocket. The white rose inside looked perfect against the baby blue ribbon. Rion would love it. She had that gentle way about her, shy smile hiding behind dark hair, but her eyes lit up when she talked about her poetry. They had been together for 8 months, and Blake still felt lucky every time she said yes to another date. The dance floor pulsed with music and teenage energy. Blake found Rion near the punch table, wearing a soft blue dress that matched her corsage perfectly. When he pinned it to her wrist, she stood on her toes to kiss his cheek. "Thank you," she whispered, and Blake felt that familiar flutter in his chest. They danced to 3 songs, her head on his shoulder during the slow ones. The evening felt magical, suspended between the end of childhood and whatever came next. Blake had been writing more in his journal lately, trying to capture these moments that felt too precious to lose. "I should head home soon," Rion said as the last song faded. "My parents said 11:30. Blake walked her to the parking lot, where her mother waited in their sedan. The October air carried the first hint of winter, making Rion pull her wrap closer around her shoulders. "I'll text you when I get to Austin's," Blake promised, squeezing her hand before she got in the car. The taillights disappeared around the corner, leaving him alone under the parking lot lights. His phone buzzed. "Austin, where are you, man? My mom's making pancakes for breakfast." Blake typed back quickly, "Walking over now. See you in 20. The streets of Newnan lay quiet under the streetlights. Blake had walked these roads hundreds of times, but tonight they felt different somehow, older. He pulled out his phone and started a text to Rion, then stopped. She would be home by now, probably telling her parents about the dance. Instead, he opened his voice memos app. October 15th, 11:45 p.m. Walking to Austin's after homecoming. Good night. Really good night. Rion looked beautiful. Sometimes I think about what comes next, after graduation, but tonight was perfect, just perfect. He slipped the phone back in his pocket and quickened his pace towards Summergrove neighborhood. The wind picked up, rustling through the trees that lined Mary Freeman Road. Blake pulled his jacket tighter and walked on into the darkness. But he never arrived at Austin's house. Somewhere between the school parking lot and his destination, Blake Tyler Chappell simply vanished. Rion's phone buzzed at 12:30 a.m. She had been lying in bed, still wearing her homecoming dress, too happy to sleep. The text made her smile in the darkness. "Blake, at Austin's, thanks for perfect night. Sweet dreams," she typed back. "Had the best time. Sleep well," but the message never delivered. The little delivered notification never appeared under her words. Rion stared at her phone screen, then tried again. Still nothing. Maybe his phone died, she thought. Boys never remembered to charge their phones. She fell asleep holding her phone, the corsage still pinned to her wrist. In her dreams, they were dancing again under those silver lights, spinning forever to music that never ended. Miles away, Austin sat up in his bed, checking his phone for the 10th time. Blake had said 20 minutes. It was past 1 a.m. now. He tried calling, but it went straight to voicemail. "Hey, it's Blake. Leave a message and I'll call you back." "Dude, where are you? My mom made extra pancakes and everything. Call me when you get this." Austin tried to sleep, but worry gnawed at him. Blake was reliable. He always showed up when he said he would. Something felt wrong, like a song with a missing note. At 6 a.m. Austin's phone rang. Blake's mother, her voice tight with concern. "Austin, honey, is Blake there with you?" "No, ma'am. He never showed up last night. I figured maybe he changed his mind and went home." Silence stretched between them, filled with growing dread. "He's not here," she said quietly. "His bed wasn't slept in." Austin sat up straighter, fully awake now. "Maybe he went somewhere else? You know Blake, he's always helping somebody." But even as he said it, Austin knew it wasn't true. Blake would have called. Blake always called. By 7 a.m., both mothers were making phone calls. To friends, to relatives, to anyone who might have seen Blake after the dance. The responses were all the same. "No, sorry, haven't seen him. Let us know if you need help looking." The text message thread between Blake and Rion became evidence, those final exchanges frozen in digital amber, the last proof that Blake Tyler Chappell had been alive and happy at 11:52 p.m. on October 15th, 2011. Rion stared at her phone screen until her eyes watered. The undelivered message mocked her from the bottom of the thread. "Had the best time. Sleep well." Words that would never reach the boy who had made her feel like the only girl in the world. She tried calling his number one more time. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Then Blake's voice, bright and confident. "Hey, it's Blake. Leave a message and I'll call you back." Rion hung up without speaking. In her jewelry box, the white rose corsage was already beginning to wilt. The security camera at the corner of Mary Freeman Road and Elm Street recorded everything in grainy black and white. At 11:58 p.m., a lone figure walked past, hands in his jacket pockets, moving at an easy pace. The timestamp burned in the corner. 10/15/2011, 23:58 and 3 seconds. Blake Tyler Chappell, captured for the last time. Detective Sarah Chen would study this footage hundreds of times over the coming weeks. She could make out Blake's profile, the way he walked with purpose, but without hurry. Nothing in his posture suggested fear or distress. He looked like any teenager walking home from a dance, full of life and unaware that danger waited somewhere in the darkness ahead. The camera's range ended at Elm Street. Beyond that intersection, the residential roads of Newnan had no surveillance, no electronic eyes to witness what happened next. Blake walked out of recorded history at 11:58 p.m. and disappeared into the void. Mrs. Patterson, who lived on the corner, told police she remembered hearing voices sometime after midnight. "Sounded like young people talking," she said. "But I didn't think nothing of it. Kids walk by here all the time." She couldn't remember how many voices or whether they sounded friendly or angry. Just voices in the dark, fading into the night wind. 3 blocks from the camera, footprints appeared in the soft dirt beside Summergrove Parkway. Sneaker treads. Size 11, matching the shoes Blake wore to homecoming. The prints headed toward the wooded area where the creek ran alongside the road. Then the prints stopped. Crime scene technicians would later find scuff marks in the dirt, as if someone had dragged their feet. A few drops of blood on a tree branch, but no clear trail to follow. No obvious path to answers. The last confirmed sighting of Blake Tyler Chappell was that security footage, timestamped 11:58 p.m. After that, he became a ghost, a shadow, a question mark that would haunt his family and his community for over a decade. Detective Chen printed still frames from the video and pinned them to her investigation board. Blake's face stared back at her, frozen in those final moments of normalcy. In the image, he looked like he was walking toward his future, not into an ambush. The camera had captured truth, but not enough truth. It showed the last steps of a young man's life, but couldn't reveal who waited for him in the darkness beyond. Blake's mother woke before dawn, hoping to find her son asleep on the couch or in his room, some simple explanation for his absence, but the house remained eerily quiet. His bed still made with military precision the way she had taught him. At 6:30 a.m. she called the Newnan Police Department. "My son didn't come home last night," she told the dispatcher, trying to keep her voice steady. "He went to homecoming and was supposed to stay at a friend's house, but he never arrived." The dispatcher took the information with practiced calm. Missing teenagers were common, especially after school dances. Most showed up within 24 hours, with sheepish grins and stories about parties or late-night adventures. "We'll need to wait 24 hours before filing an official report," the dispatcher explained. "Kids his age often—" "Blake doesn't do that," his mother interrupted. "He always calls. He always lets me know where he is." But policy was policy. She would have to wait. Instead, she drove to Austin's house and knocked on the door at 7 a.m. Austin's parents confirmed what she already feared. Blake had never arrived. By noon, word spread through Blake's circle of friends. Social media posts began appearing. "Has anyone seen Blake Chappell? Blake missing since homecoming last night. Please share." His mother printed photos at Walmart. Hundreds of copies of Blake's school picture, his smile bright and confident. She stapled them to telephone poles, taped them in store windows, handed them to anyone who would take one. "Missing. Blake Tyler Chappell, age 17. Last seen October 15 after East Coweta High School homecoming dance. If you have any information, please call Newnan police. Rion appeared at the house around 2 p.m., her eyes red from crying. "I should have insisted he call someone for a ride," she whispered. "I should have made sure he got there safely." Blake's mother hugged her close. "This isn't your fault, sweetheart. Blake makes his own decisions." But privately, she wondered the same things. Should she have driven him to the dance? Should she have insisted he come straight home? The what-ifs multiplied like cancer cells, eating away at her composure. By evening, the missing person flyer hung in every store window in Newnan. Blake's face looked out from grocery stores and gas stations, from restaurant bulletin boards and church fellowship halls. The whole town now knew that Blake Tyler Chappell was gone. The vigil of waiting had begun. Day 2 brought organized search parties. Blake's mother stood in the East Coweta High School parking lot at 8 a.m., watching neighbors and strangers gather around fold-out tables loaded with maps and bottled water. The principal had canceled classes, sending students home with the promise that counselors would be available. Detective Chen divided the searchers into groups. "We'll work in grids," she announced, spreading a large map across the table. "Each team takes a section. Look for anything that might belong to Blake. Clothing, his phone, anything that seems out of place." Austin carried a red marker, placing pins on the map wherever his team had searched. The woods behind Summergrove Parkway, the old railroad tracks, the abandoned buildings near the creek. Each red pin represented hope exhausted, another place where Blake wasn't. "He loved those woods when we were kids," Austin told the detective. "We used to build forts back there, play army. If he was hiding somewhere, that's where he'd go." But the woods revealed nothing except beer cans and old camping gear. No sign that Blake had ever been there. Rion joined the search after school, still wearing her homecoming corsage like a talisman. She walked the route between her house and Austin's, retracing Blake's intended path. Every shadow made her heart skip. Every piece of litter made her stop and look closer. "Blake," she called into the trees. "Blake, if you can hear me, we're looking for you." Only silence answered back. The local news arrived on day 3. A van from Channel 2 Action News parking outside the high school. A reporter with perfectly styled hair interviewed Blake's mother on camera. "Blake is a good boy," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "He writes in his journal every night. He helps neighbors with their yard work. He would never just disappear without telling someone where he was going." The story ran that evening during the 6 o'clock news. Local teen missing after homecoming dance. Blake's school picture filled the screen, while the anchor read details in a somber voice. Tips started coming in. Someone thought they saw Blake hitchhiking on Highway 34. Another caller claimed he was at a party in Peachtree City. Each lead sent search teams scrambling, only to come back empty-handed. By the end of the first week, the red pins covered half the map. Hundreds of acres searched. Thousands of flyers distributed, dozens of false leads chased down and eliminated. Blake Tyler Chappell had simply vanished, as if the earth had opened up and swallowed him whole. The police station became a second home for Blake's family. Every morning his mother arrived with fresh coffee and questions. Had any new tips come in overnight? Were there any updates from the search teams? Any word from the FBI about bringing in their missing persons unit? Detective Chen's desk overflowed with Blake's case files. Interview notes from classmates, friends, teachers. Background checks on anyone who had contact with Blake in the weeks before homecoming. Phone records showing his last call to Austin at 11:43 p.m. "We've cleared 17 potential persons of interest," Chen told Blake's mother during one of their daily meetings. "Everyone from his work-study program, his teammates from track, even that kid he had a disagreement with over a girl last year." Blake's mother clutched her purse tighter. "What about strangers? Someone he didn't know?" "We're looking into that too. But most crimes against teenagers are committed by someone they know. We have to start with the inner circle and work outward." The interviews revealed a picture of a well-liked young man with no serious enemies. Blake worked part-time at a local grocery store, earned decent grades, planned to study journalism at the University of Georgia. His biggest rebellion was staying out past curfew occasionally, or forgetting to call when plans changed. He was writing a story for the school newspaper about the football team, his English teacher told Detective Chen. Blake had a real talent for capturing people's voices, making them come alive on the page. The story sat unfinished on Blake's computer, a document titled "Friday Night Lights" in Newnan, with only 3 paragraphs completed. His journal, found in his bedroom, contained typical teenage thoughts about the future, concerns about college applications, and frequent mentions of how happy Rion made him feel. Nothing suggested Blake was planning to run away or hurt himself. Nothing indicated he was in trouble or afraid of anyone. "It's like he just evaporated," Detective Chen confided to her partner. "Teenage boys don't just disappear without leaving some kind of trail." But Blake had done exactly that. Somewhere between the security camera on Elm Street and Austin's house in Summergrove, he had stepped out of existence, The police station's waiting room became a familiar space for Blake's mother. She knew which chair had the best view of the detective's desk, which coffee in the machine was least terrible, which officers would give her honest updates versus bureaucratic non-answers. Hope began to feel like a weight she carried, heavier each day but impossible to put down. November brought the first frost, silver etching the windows of Blake's bedroom. His mother left everything exactly as he had arranged it. The journal open on his desk to the last entry. Clean clothes folded in his dresser. College brochures stacked neatly beside his computer. She had circled December 23rd on the kitchen calendar in red ink. Blake's 18th birthday. Now the date loomed like a deadline, as if 18 years of life couldn't possibly end 1 month short of adulthood. We should probably cancel the party, Blake's aunt suggested gently. They had planned a small celebration. Just family and close friends. Now the thought of birthday cake without Blake felt obscene. The red X she drew through December 23rd on the calendar felt like giving up, like admitting Blake might not come home in time for his birthday. But false hope hurt worse than honest grief. Thanksgiving came and went in subdued tones. Blake's empty chair at the dinner table drew everyone's eyes like a wound. His mother set his place anyway, complete with his favorite stuffing and cranberry sauce, as if abundance might somehow call him home. Maybe he's somewhere warm, his grandmother said, trying to fill the silence. Maybe he's working on a ranch in Texas or something and just can't call right now. Everyone nodded as if this made sense, though they all knew Blake's bank account remained untouched. His clothes still hung in his closet. His car still sat in the driveway with a tank half full of gas. December brought the first significant snowfall in years. Blake loved snow, had always been the first one outside to build snowmen or start snowball fights. His mother stood at the kitchen window, watching fat flakes cover the backyard, and realized she was crying again. "He's missing the snow," she whispered to the empty house. The search teams had been called off weeks ago. "We've covered every reasonable location," Detective Chen explained. "At this point we're waiting for someone to come forward with information, or for Blake to contact us himself." The unspoken possibility hung between them like smoke, that Blake might never contact anyone again, that somewhere in the woods or water around Newnan, a mother's worst nightmare was already becoming someone's terrible discovery. Christmas morning arrived gray and cold. Blake's presents sat under the tree, wrapped weeks earlier when hopes still felt reasonable. His mother left them there through New Year's, colorful reminders of a future that might never come. The jogger noticed something unusual in the creek water on December 19th, exactly 2 months after homecoming night. What looked like clothing, tangled in the branches near the Summergrove Parkway bridge, something pale and waterlogged, caught in the current but held fast by fallen limbs. She called 911 from her cell phone, her voice shaky. "I think I found something in Sweetwater Creek. It might be a person." Within an hour, the creek swarmed with police officers, crime scene technicians, and the medical examiner. Yellow tape stretched between trees, blocking the view from curious onlookers gathering on the bridge above. Detective Chen waded into the cold water, wearing hip boots and latex gloves. What the jogger had spotted was indeed clothing, an undershirt and underwear, wrapped around what was unmistakably human remains. Blake Tyler Chappell had been found. The medical examiner worked carefully to document the scene before moving the body. 2 months in the water had taken their toll, but enough remained for positive identification. Blake's dental records confirmed what everyone already knew in their hearts. His mother collapsed when Detective Chen delivered the news in person. The kitchen, where she had waited every day for Blake to come home through the back door, became the place where hope finally died. "We found him," Chen said simply, then caught Blake's mother as her legs gave way. The crime scene photographs would show Blake's body tangled in creek debris, wearing only undergarments. His clothes from homecoming night were never recovered. The nice slacks, the button-down shirt, the tie he had adjusted so carefully in the school bathroom mirror. A single gunshot wound to the chest had killed him, the medical examiner determined. Close range, probably with a small-caliber handgun. The bullet had passed through his body and was never recovered from the creek. "This changes everything," Detective Chen told her supervisor. "Blake didn't run away. He didn't have an accident. Someone murdered him and dumped his body in that creek." The missing person case became a homicide investigation. Blake's bedroom, preserved like a shrine for 2 months, was now a crime scene. Every friend who had been interviewed as a potential witness became a potential suspect. News vans returned to Newnan, their satellite dishes reaching toward gray December skies. "Missing teen, found dead," scrolled across television screens throughout Georgia. Blake Tyler Chappell's story had entered its darkest chapter. The boy who loved to write had become the subject of someone else's terrible story. The autopsy report arrived 3 days before Christmas, clinical language describing the violent end of 17 years of life. Single gunshot wound to the chest, penetrating the left ventricle of the heart. Death would have been rapid, small comfort in sterile medical terminology. Detective Chen spread crime scene photos across her desk, searching for clues in the arrangement of Blake's body in the creek. The current had moved him from wherever he was originally placed, tangling him in branches about a quarter-mile downstream from the Summergrove Parkway bridge. Killer had to know the area, she reasoned aloud to her partner. You don't just stumble across that part of the creek in the dark. Someone familiar with the local geography chose that spot. The medical examiner estimated Blake had been in the water for nearly 2 months, meaning he was killed shortly after disappearing on October 15th. The timeline was brutally simple. Homecoming dance, walk to Austin's house, murder, body disposal, all within a few hours on what should have been one of the best nights of Blake's young life. Blake's mother insisted on attending the autopsy briefing. Despite everyone's advice to stay away, she sat rigid in Detective Chen's office, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles went white. I need to understand what happened to my son, she said when Chen suggested she might want to skip the medical details. The detective chose her words carefully. Blake didn't suffer. The wound would have caused unconsciousness within seconds. He wouldn't have felt afraid for long. It was both true and meaningless. A mother's imagination could fill in the terror Blake must have experienced in those final moments. Gun pointed at his chest, realizing his life was about to end at 17. Outside East Coweta High School, students gathered for an impromptu vigil. Someone brought battery-powered speakers, playing Blake's favorite songs from homecoming night. Candles flickered in the December wind while teenagers hugged each other and cried. Rion stood at the center of the crowd, still wearing the wilted homecoming corsage she refused to take off. Her voice broke as she spoke to the assembled crowd. Blake was going to study journalism. He wanted to tell people stories, to give voice to anyone who felt like they weren't being heard. Someone silenced his voice, but we won't let them silence his memory. The vigil made the evening news. Shaky footage of young faces lit by candlelight. Blake's school picture appeared on screen again, but now the caption read, homicide victim instead of missing teen. Christmas came anyway, relentless and obscene. Blake's presence remained under the tree, now memorial objects instead of birthday gift. The homicide investigation began with Blake's inner circle, everyone who had seen him in the days and weeks before homecoming. Detective Chen compiled a timeline of Blake's final month, looking for any deviation from his normal routine, any new person who might have entered his life with violent intentions. Austin submitted to another formal interview, this time at the police station with his parents present. The questions felt different now, more pointed and suspicious. Did Blake seem worried about anything? Detective Chen asked. Any problems with other students? Anyone giving him trouble? Austin shook his head. Blake got along with everybody. I mean, he wasn't like popular, but people liked him. He was just steady, you know? Never got into drama. The investigation expanded to Blake's workplace, his track teammates, even casual acquaintances from his journalism class. Everyone told the same story. Blake Tyler Chappell was a good kid who didn't make enemies. Rion faced the hardest questioning of all. She had been the last person to see Blake alive, the last to speak with him before he walked into the darkness. Think carefully, Detective Chen urged. Was there anyone at the dance who seemed to pay particular attention to Blake? Anyone who might have followed him when he left? Rion closed her eyes, trying to recreate every moment of homecoming night. There were so many people there, but Blake danced with me most of the evening. He was friendly to everyone, but he wasn't paying attention to anyone else. The detective showed her photographs of potential suspects, local men with histories of violence or connections to the high school. Rion studied each face carefully, but none triggered recognition. I keep thinking, if I had insisted on driving him to Austin's, she whispered, or if I had asked my mom to give him a ride, he might still be alive. Survivor's guilt began eating away at everyone in Blake's circle. Austin blamed himself for not driving to pick up Blake when he didn't arrive on time. Rion tortured herself for not ensuring Blake got transportation. Blake's mother wondered if she should have been more protective, more cautious about letting her 17-year-old son walk alone at night. The list of cleared suspects grew longer each week. Blake's coworkers, his teachers, even distant relatives who had attended recent family gatherings. Everyone had alibis, everyone passed polygraph tests, everyone genuinely seemed shocked by Blake's murder. It's like he was killed by a ghost, Detective Chen confided to her supervisor. Whoever did this left no physical evidence, no digital trail, no witnesses. They're either incredibly lucky or incredibly smart, or, she didn't add, incredibly familiar with police investigative techniques. East Coweta High School's graduation ceremony in May 2013 included an empty chair in the front row, decorated with Blake's school colors and a framed photograph. When the principal read his name during the memorial portion of the program, silence filled the auditorium like prayer. Austin walked across the stage to receive his diploma, but the moment felt hollow. He and Blake had planned to attend the University of Georgia together, roommates who would study business and journalism respectively. Now Austin faced college alone, carrying the weight of their shared dreams. Blake Tyler Chappell would have graduated with honors, the principal announced. His family will accept his diploma posthumously. Blake's mother rose from her seat in the front row, moving slowly toward the stage. She wore black despite the spring warmth, a woman still deep in mourning. When she accepted the diploma folder, the auditorium erupted in applause that seemed to go on forever. Later, at the cemetery, Rion knelt beside Blake's headstone, with her own graduation cap and gown still on. She had finally removed the homecoming corsage after 7 months, but she brought it with her, placing the dried rose petals on his grave. "I got into art school," she whispered to the headstone. "The one in Savannah we talked about. I'm going to study poetry and creative writing, like you encouraged me to do." The inscription on Blake's marker read simply, "Blake Tyler Chappell, 1993, 2011, beloved son and friend." Below that, a line from his favorite poem, "The woods are lovely, dark and deep." His mother had chosen the Robert Frost quotation, remembering how Blake used to recite poetry while they walked through the neighborhood. Now those same woods felt sinister, hiding secrets and violent strangers. The homicide investigation continued, but leads had dried up completely. Detective Chen worked other cases while keeping Blake's file active, hoping for new information or a witness who might finally come forward. The case was technically open, but practically dormant. "These things sometimes take years to solve," Chen told Blake's mother during one of their monthly check-ins. "Someone out there knows what happened. Eventually they might decide to talk," but eventually felt like never to a mother whose son would be forever 17, forever walking alone through dark streets toward a destination he would never reach. The empty chair at graduation became a symbol of all the milestones Blake would never experience. Prom king, college graduation, wedding day, children of his own, all erased by a single gunshot on a cold October night. Years passed like pages in a book no one wanted to read. 2014 became 2015. Then 2016, each anniversary of Blake's death marked by smaller and smaller gatherings at his grave. The town moved on, as towns do. New tragedies captured public attention. Blake's case file gathered dust in a metal cabinet at the police station. Detective Chen retired in 2017, handing Blake's case to Detective Williams, a younger officer who studied the evidence with fresh eyes but reached the same conclusions. No physical evidence, no credible witnesses, no obvious motive or suspect. Blake's mother kept his bedroom exactly as he had left it, a shrine to interrupted possibilities. His journal still lay open to that final entry, the one about homecoming being perfect. The irony felt cruel enough to make her avoid the room most days. Austin finished college and returned to Newnan, taking a job at a local bank. Sometimes he drove past Blake's house, wondering if he should stop and visit, but the weight of survivor's guilt made such visits feel like intrusion. He had lived the life Blake was supposed to live, and the unfairness of that fact never faded. Rion graduated from art school and moved to Atlanta, but she returned every October 15th to place fresh flowers on Blake's grave. She never married, though she dated occasionally. No one ever quite measured up to the memory of a boy who had loved her purely at 17, who had died before they could grow apart or grow complicated. In 2020, Blake's case was transferred to the cold case unit, a formal acknowledgement that active leads had been exhausted. Detective Martinez, a specialist in unsolved homicides, reviewed the file with methodical precision. "Sometimes these cases crack when the killer develops a conscience," he told Blake's mother, "or when someone close to them finally decides to come forward. We never stop hoping for that phone call." Blake's mother had started a support group for families of murder victims, meeting monthly in the basement of her church. She found purpose in helping others navigate the impossible geography of grief, but Blake's absence still defined every day of her life. The case file contained hundreds of pages by then: interview transcripts, crime scene photos, evidence logs, tips from psychics and concerned citizens, a paper mountain documenting the systematic search for truth that had yielded so little. Blake Tyler Chappell remained a question without an answer, a story without an ending. In the cold case files, he was case 2820188847, but to those who loved him, he was still the boy walking home from homecoming, forever frozen at 17, forever just out of reach. Blake's mother refused to let his story fade into statistical obscurity. In 2020, she began reaching out to true crime podcasts, television shows, anyone who might bring fresh attention to her son's case. She appeared on Unsolved Mysteries, sitting in Blake's childhood bedroom, holding his school photograph while cameras rolled. Blake was going to be a journalist, she told the interviewer. He wanted to tell stories about people who didn't have a voice. I'm trying to make sure his story gets told, so maybe someone watching will remember something they saw that night. The episode aired nationally, generating dozens of tips. Most led nowhere. Mistaken identities, false confessions from attention seekers, conspiracy theories about government cover-ups. But Blake's mother followed every lead with desperate hope. She compiled a scrapbook of media coverage over the years, newspaper clippings from 2011, when Blake first disappeared, magazine articles about unsolved Georgia murders, screenshots from social media posts by true crime enthusiasts who had adopted Blake's case as their pet mystery. Season of Justice, a documentary series on Netflix, featured Blake's murder in a 40-minute episode titled Homecoming King. The show recreated his final evening with actors, interviewing his family and friends against the backdrop of Newnan's quiet streets. Rion appeared on camera for the first time since 2011, her voice steady, but her hands shaking as she described their last dance together. I used to think if I could just go back to that moment and change one thing, ask my mom to drive him, or convince him to stay with me, he'd still be alive. But you can't think that way. You'll go crazy. The documentary ended with Blake's senior portrait filling the screen, while his mother's voice played over it. Whoever killed Blake is still out there. They're living their life while my son's life ended at 17. That's not justice. That's not acceptable. Tips poured in after the documentary aired. Someone thought they saw Blake at a gas station the night he disappeared. Another caller claimed to have heard gunshots near Summergrove Creek around midnight on October 15th. Each lead required investigation. Each investigation ended in disappointment, but Blake's mother never stopped hoping. She turned her grief into activism, pushing for better funding for cold case units, advocating for families of murder victims, keeping Blake's name in public consciousness through sheer force of will. I'll fight for answers until the day I die, she told a reporter on the 10th anniversary of Blake's murder. Blake would have fought for justice if it were someone else's son. I owe him the same fight. The letter arrived at the Newnan Police Department on a Tuesday morning in March 2023, addressed simply to Homicide Detective, Blake Chappell case. The envelope bore a local postmark but no return address. Inside, someone had typed a short message on plain white paper. You need to look at Scotty Elliott Smith. He knows what happened to Blake Chappell that night. Ask him about the gun he got rid of in 2012. Detective Martinez read the letter 3 times before reaching for Blake's case file. He had worked cold cases long enough to know that anonymous tips usually led nowhere, but something about this one felt different. The specificity of the name, the mention of a gun, the timing. 2012, just months after Blake's murder, he ran Scotty Elliott Smith through the database. Local man, 34 years old, several arrests for minor drug possession and domestic disturbance calls. No connection to Blake Chappell in any of the original investigation files. Smith had never been interviewed, never even appeared on the radar. Martinez called Blake's mother with the news. We have a new lead, he said carefully. I don't want to get your hopes up, but someone has pointed us toward a person we never looked at before. Her voice caught. After all these years, sometimes that's how these cases break. Someone's conscience finally gets the better of them, or they get tired of carrying the secret. We're going to bring this Smith fellow in for questioning. Martinez spent hours studying Smith's background. Born and raised in Newnan, worked construction jobs sporadically, lived alone in a trailer park on the outskirts of town. No obvious connection to Blake or his friends, but that didn't mean much. Random stranger killings were rare, but not impossible. The detective drove to Smith's address on a gray March morning, finding a run-down single-white trailer with an overgrown yard. Smith answered the door in a stained t-shirt, his eyes darting nervously when Martinez showed his badge. Hey, Smith, Martinez shouted when Martinez showed his badge. I'd like to ask you a few questions about Blake Chappell, Martinez said. The teenager who was murdered in 2011. You mind if we talk? Smith's reaction was immediate and telling. His face went pale, and he gripped the doorframe as if he might fall down. I don't know nothing about that, he said quickly. Too quickly. Can I come in? Just a few routine questions? Smith shook his head. I'm busy right now. Got somewhere to be. Martinez handed him a business card. Call me when you have time to talk. This is important. As the detective walked back to his car, he could feel Smith watching from behind curtained windows. After 12 years of dead ends, something in Scotty Smith's nervous energy suggested the case might finally have life again. Detective Martinez returned to Smith's trailer the next day with backup and a more formal approach. Smith's truck was gone, but his neighbors said he'd seen him leave early that morning, driving fast and looking upset. Scotty's been acting strange lately, the neighbor confided. Drinking more than usual, talking to himself. Yesterday, after you left, I heard him on the phone yelling at someone about keeping their mouth shut. Martinez put out a bolo alert for Smith's vehicle and settled in to wait. Running was often as good as a confession, in his experience. Innocent people didn't usually flee when police wanted to discuss old crimes. Smith surfaced 2 days later at his ex-girlfriend's apartment in LaGrange, 40 miles from Newnan. Local police found him passed out drunk in her parking lot, sleeping in his truck. They brought him back to Newnan for questioning. He ran back to Newnan for questioning. In the interview room, Smith looked haggard and defeated. Martinez had seen that look before. The expression of someone who had been carrying a terrible secret for too long. "Scotty, we need to talk about Blake Chappell," Martinez began. "The night he was killed in 2011. Someone says you know something about it." Smith's hands shook as he lit a cigarette. "I already told you. I don't know nothing about no Blake whatever. Blake Tyler Chappell, 17 years old. Shot and killed after homecoming night, October 15th, 2011. His body was found in Sweetwater Creek. At the mention of the creek, Smith flinched visibly. Martinez pressed the advantage. "You know that creek, don't you, Scotty? You've been there before." "Everybody knows that creek. I fish there sometimes." "Do you own a gun, Scotty?" "Used to. Had a Duck 22 pistol, but I got rid of it years ago." Martinez felt his pulse quicken. The anonymous letter had mentioned a gun disposed of in 2012. "When did you get rid of it, and why?" Smith stubbed out his cigarette with shaking fingers. "I don't remember exactly. Maybe 2012, maybe 2013. It wasn't working right no more." "Where did you dispose of it?" "Threw it in a lake somewhere. Can't remember which one." Martinez leaned forward. "Scotty, I think you're lying to me. I think you remember a lot more about 2011 than you're telling me. I think you know exactly what happened to Blake Chappell." Smith stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I want a lawyer. I'm not saying nothing else without a lawyer." The interview ended, but Martinez felt more optimistic than he had in months. Smith's nervous energy, his mention of disposing of a gun in 2012, his obvious familiarity with the creek where Blake's body was found, pieces were starting to align. Smith's court-appointed attorney advised him to remain silent, but the weight of 12 years seemed to be crushing him. He sat in his jail cell, awaiting a bond hearing, staring at the ceiling and muttering to himself. Detective Martinez reviewed everything they had learned about Smith. He had been living in Newnan in 2011, working occasional construction jobs, struggling with alcohol and drug problems. No alibi for October 15th that anyone could verify. More importantly, Martinez discovered that Smith had briefly worked at the grocery store where Blake was employed, though their shifts had never overlapped. It was a connection, however tenuous. On his third day in custody, Smith asked to speak with Detective Martinez again, this time without his attorney present. "I can't sleep," Smith said when Martinez entered the interview room. "Haven't slept right in years, if I'm being honest." Martinez waited, sensing that Smith was ready to talk. "That boy," Smith continued, his voice barely above a whisper, "Blake, he was just walking, you know? Just walking down the road like he didn't have a care in the world." Martinez felt his heart rate spike. "You saw Blake that night?" Smith nodded slowly. "I was driving around, couldn't sleep, drinking, which I know I shouldn't have been doing. I saw this kid walking by himself. Looked like he was going somewhere." "What happened next, Scotty?" "I pulled over. I don't know why. I was messed up, angry about some stuff with my ex-girlfriend. This kid, he looked so happy, you know? Like everything was perfect in his life. Made me mad for some reason." Smith put his head in his hands. "I called out to him, asked if he needed a ride. He was polite about it. Said no thanks, he wasn't going far. But something in me just snapped." Martinez stayed perfectly still, afraid to break the spell of confession. "I got out of the truck with my gun, told him to get in, that I just wanted to talk. Kid got scared then, started backing away. That made me madder. Like he was too good to talk to me." Smith's voice cracked. "I didn't plan to shoot him. It just happened. One second he was standing there, the next second he was on the ground, blood everywhere." "What did you do then?" "Panicked, put him in the truck, drove to the creek. I knew that area from fishing. I thought it would wash away the evidence." Martinez had heard hundreds of confessions, but this one felt different. The detail, the emotion, the self-incrimination. Smith was finally telling the truth about October 15th, 2011. "I'm sorry," Smith whispered. "I've wanted to say that for 12 years. I'm sorry." The arrest warrant for Scotty Elliott Smith was signed on September 12, 2025, 14 years after Blake Tyler Chappell walked alone into the darkness of Newnan's quiet streets. Detective Martinez called Blake's mother personally to deliver the news. "We got him," Martinez said simply. "The man who killed Blake is in custody." The silence on the other end stretched so long that Martinez wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, Blake's mother spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "Are you sure?" "After all this time, are you absolutely sure?" He confessed. He knew details that were never made public. He told us things only the killer could know. Blake's mother sat down heavily in her kitchen chair, the same chair where she had waited for Blake to come home from homecoming 14 years earlier. The weight of those years, the sleepless nights, the false leads, the gradual acceptance that justice might never come, seemed to lift from her shoulders all at once. "What's his name?" she asked. "Scotty Elliott Smith, local man, no prior connection to Blake that we could find. Seems like it was a random encounter that went wrong." The randomness almost made it worse. Blake had died not because of some grand conspiracy or personal vendetta, but because a drunk, angry stranger had seen a happy teenager and decided to destroy that happiness on impulse. News of the arrest spread through Newnan like wildfire. The Newnan Times-Herald ran a front-page story: "Arrest made in 2011, murder of local teen." Television news trucks returned to the familiar locations: East Coweta High School, the creek where Blake was found, the police station where his family had waited so long for answers. Austin, now 32, and married with children of his own, called Blake's mother when he heard the news. "I can't believe it's finally over," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's not over," she replied. "Now we have to get through a trial, but at least we know who did it. At least Blake's name is cleared of all those rumors about running away or being involved in something bad." Rion drove from Atlanta as soon as she heard, arriving at Blake's grave with a bouquet of white roses, the same flowers he had given her for homecoming. She knelt beside his headstone and spoke aloud for the first time in years. "They caught him, Blake. The person who hurt you. I hope you can rest easier now." The community that had rallied around Blake's family in 2011 rallied again in 2025, but this time with a sense of vindication rather than desperate hope. Justice had been delayed, but not denied. At the police station, Detective Martinez filed his final report on case 2011-1847. After 14 years, Blake Tyler Chappell could finally rest in peace. His killer had a name, a face, and would soon face judgment for the crime that had haunted a community for over a decade. The courthouse steps filled with candles that evening, hundreds of them flickering in the September darkness. Blake's friends, now adults with families of their own, stood beside his mother as she addressed the crowd. "Justice doesn't bring Blake back," she said, her voice carrying across the gathering, "but it gives us answers. It gives us peace. And it proves that some secrets are too heavy for even the worst among us to carry forever." Smith was formally charged with felony murder, aggravated assault, possession of a firearm, during the commission of a felony, concealing the death of another, and tampering with evidence. His bond was denied, ensuring he would remain in custody until trial. A week after Smith's arrest, Blake's family made a pilgrimage to the creek where his body had been recovered. They had avoided the location for years, unable to bear the weight of that terrible discovery. But now, with answers finally in hand, they felt strong enough to face the place where Blake's story had seemed to end. Blake's mother carried a wreath of white roses, the same flowers he had loved to give Rion. His aunt brought a small wooden cross, handmade by Blake's grandfather before he passed away in 2018. Austin joined them, bringing his own children, so they could learn about the friend their father still talked about with such love and loss. The creek ran clear and shallow, autumn leaves floating on the surface like scattered memories. It was hard to reconcile this peaceful scene with the horror it had once contained, the violence that had brought Blake's young life to such a brutal end. "He loved nature," Blake's mother said, kneeling to place the wreath at the water's edge. "He used to write poems about these woods, about the way sunlight looked, filtering through the trees." They stood in silence for several minutes, each lost in their own thoughts, about the boy who had been taken from them so suddenly. The creek gurgled over stones, indifferent to human grief, carrying its secrets downstream toward larger waters. "I used to hate this place," Rion admitted, speaking for the first time since arriving. "I blamed the creek for hiding Blake from us for so long. But it wasn't the creek's fault. It was just holding on to him until someone was ready to tell the truth." Austin's youngest daughter, only 5 years old, asked why everyone was so sad. Austin knelt beside her, choosing his words carefully. "A long time ago, a very good man named Blake was hurt by someone very bad. We're here to remember Blake and to say thank you to this place for keeping him safe until the police could find the bad person." The little girl nodded seriously, then picked a handful of wildflowers and threw them into the water. "For Blake," she said solemnly. They walked back to their cars as the sun set, feeling lighter somehow. The creek would always be the place where Blake was found, but it no longer felt like a place of pure sorrow. It had become, in some small way, a place of resolution. District Attorney Patricia Williams reviewed the evidence against Scotty Smith with methodical precision. The confession was damning, but confessions could be recanted or challenged. She needed to build a case that would stand up to the most aggressive defense attorney. The physical evidence was limited after 14 years. Blake's clothing from that night had never been recovered. The murder weapon remained missing, presumably at the bottom of whatever lake Smith had chosen for its disposal. The creek had washed away DNA evidence and fingerprints, but they had Smith's own words, recorded and witnessed. His knowledge of details that had never been publicly released. His confession about disposing of a gun in 2012, just months after Blake's murder. Most importantly, they had his admission of guilt, given freely after being advised of his rights. The defense will argue that the confession was coerced, Williams told Detective Martinez during one of their preparation sessions. They'll claim Smith was drunk, intimidated, not thinking clearly. We need to be ready for that. Martinez had documented every step of Smith's interrogation carefully. He asked to speak with us. He waived his right to an attorney. He provided details that matched the crime scene and the medical examiner's findings. This wasn't a false confession. The prosecutor's team created a timeline of Blake's final evening, using phone records, witness statements, and security camera footage. They mapped Smith's movements that night as best they could, though he had been alone and drunk, with no reliable alibi. The randomness actually works in our favor, Williams noted. No premeditation, no grand conspiracy to discredit, just a drunken encounter that turned violent, exactly as Smith described. They prepared exhibits, photos of Blake at homecoming, smiling and full of life, crime scene images from the creek, showing what Smith's violence had wrought, transcripts of the confession, Smith's own words condemning him. Blake's mother met with the prosecution team to prepare for her victim impact statement. She had been thinking about what to say for weeks, how to summarize 17 years of love and 14 years of grief in a few minutes of courtroom testimony. I want the jury to know who Blake was, she told Williams. Not just that he was murdered, but who he was as a person, the dreams he had, the people he loved, the future that was stolen from him. The case file now contained over 1,000 pages of documents, photographs, and testimony, but at its heart, it was a simple story. A good young man walking home from a dance, and an angry stranger who decided to end his life for no reason at all. The courtroom filled early on the morning of opening statement. Blake's family occupied the first row, behind the prosecution table, their faces showing the strain of 14 years of waiting. Across the aisle, Smith's relatives sat in uncomfortable silence, struggling to reconcile the man they knew with the monster described in newspaper headlines. District Attorney Williams approached the jury box with Blake's senior portrait in her hands, the same photograph that had appeared on missing person flyers throughout Newnan in 2011. "This is Blake Tyler Chappell," she began, her voice clear and steady. 17 years old, honor student, beloved son and friend. On October 15, 2011, Blake attended his high school homecoming dance. He danced with his girlfriend, laughed with his friends, and looked forward to spending the weekend with his best friend, Austin. She paused, letting the jury study Blake's smiling face. Blake never made it to Austin's house that night. Instead, he encountered the defendant, Scotty Elliott Smith, a man who was drunk, angry, and armed with a loaded gun. For reasons that make no sense to any rational person, Smith decided that Blake Tyler Chappell had to die. Williams walked the jury through the timeline of that October evening. From Blake's last text message to Rion through the discovery of his body 2 months later, she described Smith's confession in detail, his admission of guilt after 14 years of silence. The defendant will claim he was coerced, that he was confused, that his confession cannot be trusted. But I ask you to listen to his own words, recorded and witnessed. Listen to the details he provided. Details that only Blake's killer could know. The defense attorney Robert Hayes countered with a strategy of doubt and sympathy. Smith was a troubled man, he argued, an alcoholic with mental health issues who had been manipulated by clever detectives into confessing to a crime he didn't commit. My client has struggled with addiction and depression his entire adult life, Hayes told the jury. When confronted by police about this terrible crime, he was vulnerable, frightened, and desperate to make the questions stop. People confess to crimes they didn't commit more often than you might think. Hayes painted Smith as a victim of circumstance, a man whose life had been destroyed by false accusations and prosecutorial overreach. He questioned the timing of the anonymous letter, suggesting it might have been sent by the real killer to frame an innocent man. The state wants you to believe that after 14 years of silence, my client suddenly developed a conscience and confessed to murder. But the simpler explanation is that Scotty Smith is a convenient scapegoat for a case that was never solved. Blake's mother listened to every word, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Hearing Smith's attorney describe her son's killer as a victim felt like a second murder, an attack on truth and justice that made her want to scream. Rion took the witness stand on the second day of trial, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. She described her final evening with Blake, the homecoming dance they had looked forward to for weeks, the quiet moment on her porch when he promised to text her from Austin's house. Blake was happy that night, she testified. We had been dating for 8 months, and I had never seen him more content. He talked about college, about studying journalism at UGA. He wanted to tell stories about people who didn't have a voice. The prosecutor asked her to describe Blake's character, the kind of person he had been at 17. Blake was gentle, Rion said, her voice breaking slightly. He wrote poetry in his spare time. He helped elderly neighbors with their groceries. He never got into fights or caused trouble. The worst thing he ever did was stay out past curfew sometimes. Under cross-examination, the defense attorney tried to suggest that Blake might have been involved in drugs or illegal activities that could have led to his murder. Rion's response was swift and fierce. Blake didn't even drink alcohol, she snapped. He was planning to be a journalist. He believed in truth and justice. The suggestion that he was somehow involved in criminal activity is insulting and wrong. Austin testified next, describing his friendship with Blake and the agonizing wait when Blake failed to arrive at his house that night. I called him 6 times, Austin said. Blake always answered his phone. When it went straight to voicemail, I knew something was wrong. The medical examiner took the stand to describe Blake's injuries, the single gunshot wound that had killed him instantly. Crime scene photographs were displayed for the jury, showing Blake's body as it was recovered from the creek. Detective Martinez presented the investigation timeline, the years of false leads and dead ends before the anonymous letter arrived in 2023. He described Smith's behavior during questioning, the obvious signs of guilt and deception. The defendant knew details about the crime scene that had never been released to the public, Martinez testified. He knew Blake had been shot in the chest. He knew the body was found near Summergrove Creek. He knew Blake was wearing only undergarments when recovered. The confession recording played for 45 minutes, Smith's voice filling the courtroom as he described killing Blake, in chilling detail. Several jurors looked visibly shaken by the defendant's own words. I didn't plan to shoot him, Smith's recorded voice said. It just happened. 1 second he was standing there, the next second he was on the ground. Blake's mother locked eyes with Smith across the courtroom during the recording, searching his face for any sign of remorse. Smith stared at the table in front of him, refusing to meet her gaze. The jury deliberated for 6 hours before reaching their verdict. Blake's family waited in a conference room down the hall from the courtroom, too nervous to eat or make conversation. 14 years of waiting had come down to this moment. When court reconvened, the jury foreman stood to read their decision. The courtroom fell silent except for the sound of Blake's mother's quiet crying. On the charge of felony murder, we find the defendant, Scotty Elliott Smith, guilty. The word guilty seemed to echo in the sudden stillness. Blake's mother collapsed into her sister's arms, years of grief and frustration finally released in a flood of tears. Behind them, Smith's family sat in stunned silence. On the charge of aggravated assault, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of concealing the death of another, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of tampering with evidence, we find the defendant guilty. Judge Patricia Morrison thanked the jury for their service and scheduled sentencing for the following month. Smith would remain in custody pending that hearing, likely facing life in prison without the possibility of parole. Outside the courthouse, Blake's mother addressed the crowd of reporters and supporters who had gathered on the steps. This verdict doesn't bring Blake back, she said, her voice hoarse from crying, but it gives us justice. It gives us the truth, and it proves that some secrets are too heavy to carry forever. District Attorney Williams praised the work of Detective Martinez and the cold case unit. This case proves that we never give up on victims of violent crime. Blake Tyler Chappell deserved justice, and today he received it. Rion stood beside Blake's mother, holding the same wilted homecoming corsage she had carried to every court proceeding. Blake believed in truth and justice, she told reporters. Today, truth won. Austin, now a father himself, thought about how to explain this moment to his children. Blake was my best friend, and someone took him away from us when we were just kids. Today, that person was held accountable for what they did. Smith was led away in handcuffs, his head down, avoiding the cameras and shouted questions. After 14 years of living with his secret, Scotty Elliott Smith would spend the rest of his life paying for those few minutes of violence that had destroyed so many lives. The courthouse emptied slowly, people reluctant to leave the scene of such long-awaited justice. Blake Tyler Chappell could finally rest in peace. 2 weeks after the verdict, East Coweta High School held a memorial service for Blake on what would have been his 32nd birthday. Current students who had never known him sat beside his former classmates, now adults who brought their own children to learn about the young man whose story had defined their community for so long. The gymnasium, where Blake had danced at homecoming, was decorated with white roses and photographs from his 17 years of life. His journalism teacher, now retired, read from essays Blake had written about justice and truth, words that seemed prophetic in hindsight. Blake wrote that the truth has a way of surfacing, even when people try to bury it, she told the assembled crowd. Tonight, we see how right he was. A scholarship fund established in Blake's name had raised over $50,000, money that would help other aspiring journalists attend college. The first recipient was a senior who planned to study investigative reporting, inspired by Blake's story to pursue truth wherever it might lead. Blake's mother spoke last, her voice stronger than it had been in years. Blake's story isn't really about murder, she said. It's about love, community, and the refusal to give up on justice. It's about the people who searched for him, who never stopped asking questions, who held his memory close for 14 long years. She looked out at the sea of faces, some familiar from Blake's childhood, others belonging to people who had learned his story through news coverage and documentaries. Blake would have been amazed by the love you've shown his family. He would have been proud to know that his story helped other families find closure, that his name became synonymous with never giving up hope. Rion placed a white rose on the makeshift memorial, finally removing the dried corsage from her wrist and leaving it beside Blake's photograph. After 14 years, she was ready to let go of that tangible connection to their last perfect evening together. The service ended with the playing of Blake's favorite song from homecoming night, the same melody that had filled the gymnasium on October 15, 2011. People swayed gently to the music, remembering a boy who had loved to dance, who had walked into darkness but whose light had never truly been extinguished. Outside, candles flickered in the October wind as the community dispersed, carrying Blake's memory with them into whatever tomorrow might bring. 6 months after Smith's conviction, Blake's mother stood in the lobby of the new Victims Advocacy Center in downtown Newnan. The center bore Blake's name in bronze letters beside the entrance, a permanent reminder that some stories transcend individual tragedy to become community healing. She had channeled her grief into purpose, working with other families who had lost children to violence, helping them navigate the impossible maze of grief and the criminal justice system. The work was difficult but meaningful, a way to honor Blake's memory by fighting for other victims who couldn't fight for themselves. The Blake Tyler Chappell Memorial Advocacy Center served families throughout North Georgia, providing counseling services, legal assistance, and emotional support during the darkest periods of their lives. Blake's mother had become something she never wanted to be, an expert in loss, but she used that expertise to help others survive what felt unsurvivable. Rion visited occasionally, bringing art supplies for the children's therapy program. She had married a kind man who understood that part of her heart would always belong to a boy who died at 17, who never demanded she forget her first love, or pretend it hadn't shaped her entire life. Austin brought his family for the center's grand opening, his children placing flowers on the memorial garden, planted in Blake's honor. His oldest daughter, now 10, asked why someone would hurt a person they didn't even know. Some people carry so much anger that it spills over onto innocent people, Austin explained, using words Blake's mother had taught him. That's why we have to carry extra love to balance things out. Detective Martinez, now retired, served on the center's board of directors, using his experience with cold cases to help other families understand the investigation process and maintain hope during long periods of waiting. The scholarship fund continued to grow, supporting students who shared Blake's passion for journalism and truth-telling. The first scholarship recipient had graduated from college and landed a job at a newspaper in Macon, covering crime and courts with the same dedication to justice that Blake might have brought to the profession. Smith remained in prison, serving life without parole. He had never expressed remorse for his actions, never apologized to Blake's family, never explained what had driven him to murder a teenager he barely knew. Some questions, Blake's mother realized, might never be answered, but the important questions had been resolved. Blake's killer had been caught, tried, and convicted. The truth had surfaced after 14 years of burial. Justice, delayed but not denied, had finally arrived. Standing in the center that bore her son's name, surrounded by families who were walking the same difficult path she had traveled, Blake's mother felt something approaching peace, for the first time since October 15, 2011.